Support Microbe TV. It's time for our annual fundraising drive. We depend on your support to produce high-quality science videos and podcasts. And now is the time to help us. If our programs have appealed to your science interests, or if they have helped you in some way, please record a brief audio or video with your phone and tell us about it. Let us know how we empower your inner scientist. We'll use it for our fundraising efforts. Send it to incubator@microbe.tv. And for more information on how you can give us your support, go to microbe.tv/contribute. This Week in Microbiology is brought to you by the American Society for Microbiology at asm.org/TWiM. Good morning, Pittsburgh! Not quite the delivery of Robin Williams from Good Morning Vietnam, but from Microbe TV. This is TWiM, This Week in Microbiology, where today we are recording a special episode from the Conference on Undergraduate Education, affectionately known as ASMQ, where the attendees, all of you, so give yourself an applause. Are brainstorming and sharing ideas and strategies on the most effective ways of teaching the wonders of our discipline, microbiology, to this next generation of students. This annual conference is held simultaneously with the annual Biomedical Research Conference for Minoritized Scientists, or ABRCAMS, which is being held next door at the David L. Lawrence Convention Center here in Pittsburgh. So welcome, Pittsburgh. I'm Michael Schmidt from the Medical University of South Carolina, and joining us today for this special TWiM at CUE to help our listeners explore the unseen life on Earth is our TWiM-adjacent colleague and host of Matters Microbial that drops every Thursday, the Karski Award-winning Professor of Microbiology from the University of Puget Sound, Dr. Mark Martin. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, everybody. I've got my my resident microbes with me, as you can see. So I'm glad to see you all here with your microbiota.
And joining us on stage here today is Dr. Becky Seipel-Thyman.
Hello.
And you're from Middle Tennessee State University.
Yes.
Is that in Kentucky?
No, not quite.
Okay.
A little south.
Okay. And to her
Right?
right, I haven't had my 12 cups of coffee. And to her right is Dr. Melanie Melendrex-Villard. Welcome. And you...
Hello.
And you are from Ancora Ramsey Community College.
Anoka Ramsey.
Anoka. See, I knew I was going to screw something up.
You're fine.
And that's in beautiful Minnesota.
Yes.
Home of
Anoka,
only
Minnesota.
4 lakes?
Only 4 lakes, yes.
Only 4 lakes.
Plus 9,996.
Okay. And to her right, we're going to get K-pop here today, is Dr. Katriana. I'm going to screw that up.
That's okay.
Popchak.
Yep, close enough. Katriana Popacek. Yep.
Yes. And she is from Colorado State University, home of 10,000 microbrews.
Something like that. We serve beer on campus, so
Yeah, they're serious.
yeah.
So welcome, everyone. We're going to record this very special episode of TWiM, and we're going to start all the way down at the end with Dr. Becky, who's going to introduce us to why we're here today. So why are we here today learning about TWiM?
So
I am part of a team that wrote a grant based on your all's work, TWiM, and we find that it is a good way to get students interested and really ease their transition into reading primary literature, because it is very difficult as a beginner, as all of us know. And so the discussions that you all have give insight into how scientists think about papers, and also helps to explain sort of the background, so it's not so difficult for them to enter that transition. So there are two ways that people, students and faculty, are involved in the project. One is to annotate the podcast to make it easier to see what's in them. If you're a teacher looking for a particular topic that you want to discuss in your class, having what's in them for vision and change topics, and also ASM guidelines. So students will annotate those, and it's usually with a faculty member who is at this level. It would be one of these two who are here with us. So we that wrote the grant help to train faculty so their students are annotating these. And also part of the annotation is figure reading, which is sort of the other part of this. And so students can get involved in the project, and faculty can get involved in the project at the annotation level. But part of the annotation is a figure reading exercise. So there's two, usually the recipient and the main. Students pick one figure from each, or two from one if they feel like that's what they want. And we build figure reading exercises. So having a little bit of a summary for the figure that's in there, and then multiple choice questions. So we have a sort of standalone figure reading project that faculty can also use without doing any annotation. So they can assign the podcast and have them answer the podcast questions. That's one level besides the annotation part. Or they can pick out the figure reading exercise. Like if you need something like on a scatter plot or a box plot, or related to this particular concept or topic, there are going to be ways to search those. And what we're going to end up doing with those is to put them in an open education resource, an OER, which we're building right now. And that will be freely available to everyone. We include all of these materials so that people can use them. The answers will be password protected, so they're not available to students, so you can use them for homework or in class, exams, however you want to use it. So it's multiple levels of involvement of all kinds of people. So we get all kinds of people contributing, and we're making something that is freely available to everyone.
So is this figure writing activity exclusive for the undergraduate community, or is it also taught to graduate students?
You could totally use it for either one.
Well, I principally don't have the luxury of dealing with undergraduates unless you consider medical students and dental students undergraduates, which they are. It's medicine and dentistry are undergraduate degrees. And so don't tell them that, but it is an undergraduate degree. But one of the great challenges for graduate students is getting them to design their first figure. And I think, I come from a medical school, so we often see the teaching philosophy that's advanced by surgeons: see one, do one, teach one, and then do it again. And so consequently, I think this figure writing activity would be a great activity for those of us who primarily interact with graduate students.
Yes. So when we're talking about different levels, we sort of pitch this to sort of the sophomore, junior, senior level. But when you talk to Mel, she's going to tell you about how she is scaffolding this to be able to use it for first year students, like freshman level students. So they need a little bit of extra help in sort of deciphering things that our sophomore levels would have gotten in their freshman classes. But also, as sort of a spin-off for this, I found a resource because my team in particular were finding that they were having trouble with that figure reading exercise and just being able to distinguish what they are. So I found this other resource called Understanding Figures. It's by Wu. It's just a simple little book where they made cheat sheets for figures, and I've taken that and tried to expand it so that it's like how to tell one type of figure from another, and I can share that as well. It's not complete; it's not all the way done, but I envision trying to put that also out as a press book so that it's available to people. And that might be something, in my class, which is a sophomore class, and I use it in genetics. What I'm doing is to put the figure forward, and so distinguishing one from another and why you would use one versus another. And then the sort of second part is like, what was the experiment was done? What were the question they were trying to answer? What are the conclusions? So that's the second half after they've identified what are the axes? What do the colors mean? The patterns, like how do you see the trends? But you could totally go the other way and say, what question were they trying to answer? And put the science forward for different levels. So you can use it many different ways. And so that'll sort of be in that as well.
May I comment?
Please.
I think that, when I have asked my own microbiology students to put together a presentation on a paper, sometimes they treat it like they would any other assignment they remember even from high school. And the value of what you're saying, in my opinion, is that you have something to model upon. And once they do that, I think it's helpful. Now, it is true that sometimes the terminology that is used on TWiM, I refer often to beginning micronauts and advanced micronauts, but it's really true that sometimes it gets to be jargon intense. And I would simply say about that when you learn a foreign language, there's a simple vocabulary and a more advanced. And I think that students are not put off if you put it in that fashion. They're often telling me, oh, I can't understand these things. So this is really important, especially what you're saying about interpreting a figure. And I think it's good to challenge. And once students have that environment where it's okay to be challenged and to learn from it. I mean, after all, the three most important words in science are, I don't know.
Yeah.
So congratulations on what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm fascinated how you got to this point. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what classes are you're teaching? Because I think everyone in the audience would like to know a little bit more about how Becky has arrived at this point in her career. So please take us away.
So I'm from the most rural, poorest part of Ohio. It's outside Cincinnati. And so my high school was literally in the middle of a cornfield, and I'm a first generation student as well. So neither of my parents went to college. One of them didn't finish high school till later because during the time you had to pay for your own books. And her family simply didn't have the money to pay for her books. So she went to work as a 16-year-old. So that's and my grandparents were born into the Depression. So I'm very much in that rural kind of mindset where like you work hard but they, it was very important to them that the three of us, their kids, be able to take care of themselves. So I ended up going to a school called Berea College where you have to be poor to go there, and you get free tuition if you get in. So that's where I got started. And I was telling Nan yesterday, I'm like, that was really the first time I felt very at home, because being a person who was quiet, and I tried to do really well in school because that's how I was going to get, not to be a farmer or work in a factory. So that's where I got started. And then from Berea College, I went a little bit north to the University of Kentucky, and my degree's in medical microbiology and immunology. So, but I don't teach micro. I teach genetics. So, and then I did a postdoc at Cincinnati, and then went back to UK, and arrived at Middle Tennessee right after that. So I've been teaching there. I got my little card that says I'm going to get my 25-year medallion at the end of this semester.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So, but, I didn't go into science knowing any of what was above college. And so it's all, and I didn't have a purposeful plan, but I don't feel like students my students get all frustrated and excited and anxious, like thinking they have to have this planned out. And I'm like, you don't. You can learn and change your mind along the way. And it's okay if you change your mind, be thinking about what you want to do, because a lot of my students who are a lot first gen, like me, their parents think that only medical school or dental school is the only path they're going to go.
I wish I had had you as a professor.
So, I tell them, I share this with them, that you don't have to have a super specific plan. Just do your best and pay attention to yourself and what you like and where you can contribute to the world. So.
It sounds like the audience agrees with you.
It sounds like.
So now we're going to go next to Dr. Mel. So tell us how you became active in this adventure of TWiM and this program that Nancy and Becky have been working on.
And Gwen and Amaya.
Yes.
ASMQ. They offered a session, and I know Amaya because when I was in graduate school at Montana State University, her advisor and my advisor were BFFs forever, and so we knew each other through that. So that was a fun little perk when I saw Amaya at the session, and they were describing ways in which you can engage students in the scientific literature. I introduced the scientific literature in my Principles of Biology course. First year, no prereqs. I introduce it in my microbiology course. Basically, my students are breaking down papers and learning how to break down papers from week 2. And we do our first paper as a class, and they struggle with it. We do zombie fungus because at the time it was, what was that Netflix show?
The Last of Us. And it was
yes.
HBO Max.
So I had found a couple different shows that had like Outbreak and different things. And I was like, what's your favorite show? And everybody's like, The Last of Us. I was like, great, we're doing a zombie fungus paper. And so, but it was nothing like the Netflix show.
They were disappointed.
It was rough. It had phylogenetics in it. It was fantastic. It had complex ant figures and morphology with a phylogenetic tree of 3 different genes and concatenations, and they looked at me like I was psychotic. But we learned, we wrestled with it. So we wrestled with the first paper as a class, and then they run worksheets on every module we do has a theme, and so for each theme we do a scientific study. So a lot of them, they find these scientific studies inanely, sinfully dry. And it's really hard to keep them engaged. I think the first question I asked after that zombie fungus paper was, how many times did you space out? I use an interactive lecturing software, and boom, 10 times or more. And I was like, yeah, me too. So, and Mark's right, it's a new language. I believe in immersive teaching. So my students are literally drowning in micro for an entire semester, essentially.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
It's not. I give them souvenirs at the end. But it's like learning a new language. And the only way to truly learn a new language is to really immerse yourself in the jargon. And I have vocab quizzes. They can constantly unlimited quiz themselves on the jargon, on the vocab. And so by the end of the semester, they may still not like scientific papers, but they know how to break it down, and they're no longer intimidated. Because I play it with my nursing allied health micro. I'm like, you're going to have patients you care about, patients that, inspire you, and you're going to want to learn more about what's afflicting them and how to help them and what you can do. And to do that, where are you going to go? Scientific literature. And so when I came into the session for TWiM, this was just another way that I could perhaps introduce the scientific literature or supplement what we did that was less dry. I was telling Mark earlier that my students that are working on the TWiM annotation this semester, they had the paper that Mark was on the episode. It was on Fusobacterium and then the Thor, the
Yes.
Yes, the synthetic community.
The clade.
Yes. So there's like, I think they walk in, because I do these individual meetings with the pairs of students that are doing these annotations, and they're like, that paper was like 36 pages long. I was like,
It
you
had
picked the topic.
supplements.
I haven't. They're like, next time you should put like a qualifier. This paper's 10 pages. This paper's 36 pages long. I'm like, no, because you were interested in the topic. But they loved the podcast. They loved the TWiM episode because they said it was so much easier. And it was interesting. Like they were actually engaged and they're like, because I make them read the paper, find the hypothesis, find the independent variable, find the boring stuff, right? Show me you can break down a scientific paper. And then they listen to the podcast and they're just like, I understand so much more now. This makes so much more sense, and I didn't fall asleep.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to say about The Last of Us, when I've taught about that, the last session, I bring them cordyceps tea and see if they get the point.
Oh, my.
I haven't gone that far.
It's not that kind of cordyceps.
Oh, my. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
I fell into teaching, essentially. So I am also first gen. I also identify as BIPOC. And there were not... I also learn in a different way. I grew up in the period of education in college where the professor would come up, write on the board, and when they were done with the board, they left. And it's like, okay, notes. And it was all major exams, midterms, finals, and I was not a good exam taker. I think I took the SAT twice, I took the ACT 3 times, and when I would interview at colleges, they're like, because I took AP classes, so I had above a 4.0 GPA, but they're just like, what's wrong with you? Your SATs are terrible. And I was like, because I suck at exams. I suck at standardized testing. And so when I got into college, the environment wasn't built for someone like me. You know, I was very hands-on. I needed to work and wrestle with the data. I needed worksheets. I needed to talk with my peers in class, which you're not allowed to do that because, you know, it's lecture time. And it didn't help me. I think I went from like a 4.5 coming out. I was one of the valedictorians at my high school. I ended my first semester in college with a 2.7 GPA. I got like a C- in my first biology class. I tell my students all the time, I have a PhD in microbiology. I had a 2.7 my first semester of college. So you're okay. You're doing fine.
You'll get through it.
You'll get through. You'll make it. Now, obviously, I improved. I was also one of those students that was working while they were going to school. I was working 30 to 35 hours to pay for school. And so it was a struggle. It was a huge struggle with my undergraduate education. And then I went home for a while after college because, you know, the whole experience was a bit traumatic for me. And so I did manage to graduate because I'm stubborn. And then I just went home for a couple of years and I worked. At the time I was pre-med. And that's why I wish I had instructors like Becky or professors like Becky, because my parents were the same. You know, being first generation, they're like, go get your education. That's the only way that you're going to, you know, improve your socioeconomic status in this world. And I was, originally I wanted to be a nurse. And then my dad was like, why be a nurse when you can be a doctor? And I was like 6. So I was like, yeah, okay. I was pre-med until my senior year in college. That's how influential my dad was on this. My senior year in college, I went abroad and I actually got to do some ecological conservation work and public health, and I fell in love. Came back, told my advisor I wasn't going to be pre-med anymore. I was just going to drop back to a regular biology degree, even though I'd had all the pre-med qualifications. I'd practiced the MCAT. I had done a medical minority education program at Yale. It was like I'd done all this stuff, and I came back. I'm like, I can't do this. This is not me. So I was home for 2 years, and then I did my graduate work. I wanted to combine environmental and ecological science with microbiology, so environmental micro, but I didn't know that at the time because once again, the hidden curriculum, I don't know any of this, you know, so I cold emailed which you can do, by the way. Professors, I looked them all up. I'm like, your research is really fascinating. And I sent them all like this cover email with my CV and my education. And I was like, do you have a graduate position or a tech position? Because I was like, I paid to put myself through undergrad. I'm not paying to put myself through grad school. And I remember you get paid to go to grad school. And so I was like, okay. And I got an offer from Montana State University. So I ended up going there for 7 years. I got my PhD at Montana State. And then I jumped ship and got a postdoctoral fellowship with the National Research Council, the National Academies of Sciences. And so I ended up as a contract scientist for the Army in Bangkok.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Were you in the malaria lab there?
No, dengue and
Ooh.
influenza. So as part of my PhD training, I was very heavy into learning coding and bioinformatics and genomic analysis and sequence analysis. And at the time, we had just broached into like the next generation sequencing technologies, Roche and like the ion torrent PGM and all of that. So I was in Thailand for just over 2 years with my postdoctoral fellowship, and then my mentor was like, "You're done. You're coming to Maryland." Sorry,
Close enough.
I've only had like 3 coffees this morning. You're coming to malaria. Coming to Maryland, I need you to head up our viral genetics and bioinformatics section. And I was like, well, what does that entail? And they're like, well, we need to build infrastructure to sequence thousands of viruses and analyze them phylogenetically, get diversity analysis so that we can send that data to our colleagues for vaccine design. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't sound intimidating at all.
No.
So I ended up in the Maryland, D.C. area. I was working at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. So I was there for 4 years. And at the time, the East Coast culture was just very different from what my husband and I were kind of raised with. And all of his family is in the middle of the country, and all of my family is on the western side of the country, and Hawaii is where my folks are. And we just decided we needed to move. And my husband had followed me for 7 years while I pursued my PhD. He followed me to Thailand for 2 years. He's a software engineer, and so he was able to work remote. And I said, it's your turn. Where do you want to go? What lights you up? And I'll figure it out. And that landed him a job in the Twin Cities, which is kind of central to his family, which was fantastic. And I was a stay-at-home mom. I had just had my daughter, and so I kind of left. I quit my job. I was working remote a little bit for them. And after 2 years, I decided I'd be a better mother if I went back to work. I'm being totally honest. I love my daughter. She's amazing, but I needed to go back to work. But research, when you've been out of the game for like 2 years, it's really hard to kind of break back in. And so I was wrestling with, like, what do I do with my life? Yes, you can have an existential crisis at 38. And I decided that I would teach because I really enjoyed doing professional development workshops. I had done them for satellite laboratories in Southeast Asia when I was out there. And they appreciated it and they loved it. So I developed all these modules and I loved teaching them. So I decided to adjunct because the beauty of being an adjunct is that if you hate it, you're stuck for a semester and then you can just bail. So I took an adjunct teaching position. I had 2 weeks notice to develop an anatomy and physiology level 2 prep.
Ooh.
I had no educational background. I got a book and a syllabus, which, and the department was amazing. They gave me everything to get me started. And as I was developing curriculum, I loved it. It was so fantastic. I had so much fun developing that class. And, I think after that I was hooked. I did 2 years at St. Cloud State University, just kind of in a non-tenure track assistant professor kind of research teaching hybrid. And then I landed my tenure track position, although in Minnesota we call it unlimited full-time, at Anoka Ramsey Community College. And I've been there since 2019. And I love it.
Well, I think your students are getting something really special. Because the perspective that you can bring to something as important for the next generation as this whole molecular revolution, it's literally transforming our discipline and transforming science today. And so they are really very fortunate to have you.
What's really funny is I found myself, my first semester teaching for ARCC, I had this flash of light moment because my first semester I was teaching and I got horrible student reviews. Now, to be fair, your first time teaching when you've never taught before with no educational background, that doesn't surprise me. But I sat back and I looked at my curriculum and I realized I was teaching how I was taught.
Oh, the
Because that's
sage
all
on
I
the
know.
stage.
That was all I knew. I know, it's right. She was now on the other foot. And I sat back and I'm like, what am I doing? I didn't even learn this way. Like, why am I doing this to my poor students? And so in that same semester, my college offered a stipend to redesign for open educational resources. I redesigned the entire class at the same time I was teaching it. For more hands-on activities, more worksheets, unlimited vocab quizzes. Like, I went all out. And student reviews went up the next semester, for sure.
So you were literally changing the tire while the car was moving down the road.
Yes, I just saw a meme like that this morning on Instagram. Yes, I was changing the tire as the car was moving. But I saw my students do like a 180 in terms of their engagement, and I think their trust in me as an instructor, because I reached out more. I was making sure everybody was getting what they were needing. I was asking for reflections after every exam. And I was like, what worked? What didn't work? What are you struggling with? What can I provide? Students would be like, could you come up with a worksheet on this? I'm like, yes, I can. And then I would post it in our learning management system. Or can you point us to Quizlets that are like validated, like the info's correct in those Quizlets? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, I can do that. And these were just little things they would let me know in reflections. And over the course of maybe 2 years, I built up this huge repository of just resources that cater to all the different types of learning that my students need. Because not everybody learns, obviously, through lecture. I switched to interactive lecturing as opposed to flat lecturing. I switched to a flex load for my students because I have late bloomers that they're a little slow getting started, but by the end of the semester, they're locked in, and so I allow that. And it's been a fantastic journey.
Mark?
I think that's an amazing story, and it reminds me, and I know you'll laugh at this. My late mother didn't understand any of this business in academia, right? And at one point, I was telling her something that a professor had said in my graduate program, and she looks at me and she says, "I thought people with PhDs were smart
And made money."
Well,
my grandma was like, "You make 6 figures, right?" And I was like,
Which 6 do you mean? Right. Exactly.
Do you include the decimal points?
Yeah. So,
right. How many decimal points are we moving over there?
So my point about that is that people have expectations and assumptions on both sides. We make assumptions about our students. They make assumptions about us. I call that mind reading. It's really dangerous. And what's good about you is you share your personal experience and you made it collaborative. Now, it does take more time.
It does.
But I think it's worth it. I know there are people that have enormous numbers of students in their classroom and people have smaller numbers, and so the latter might have an easier time of that. But it's important work to be done because these folks have genuine potential and they're so hard on themselves. And once you open up to them a little bit, which is sometimes dangerous, they open up to you, which is also sometimes dangerous. And you learn too much, right? You learn too much.
But there are tricks for large classrooms. I
Right.
leverage a lot. We use Desire to Learn. I don't know if anybody uses that. The specialists that we have on campus hears from me a lot because I'm like, can I do this? Can I do that? What can I automate? So I can automate messages out based on how performance is in the class. I do polling. Polling, I think a lot of people do that, right? And that's large classrooms. That's gold.
Absolutely.
Because you can ask reflective type questions and there you have it all right there.
Does the technology ever work? Every time I try, it never works. Either the internet goes down or PowerPoint decides to update spontaneously during the middle.
I think that's where, because I applied for R1 positions, I've applied for R2, I've applied for everything. And so when you apply to an R1, how many of you have ever done like a chalkboard talk, a whiteboard talk?
Oh,
about,
yes, the
about the
whiteboard
grant
talk.
that you would submit, like on the fly. And so I'm prepared to do that in my classes if tech goes down. I just turn it into a whiteboard talk because you
That's
you
what
have to
I
keep
do.
going.
Because I grew up in that era of whiteboards, but they were actually black.
Blackboards?
They were actually black. That we didn't have white. We just had black and chalk.
Yeah, sometimes you wonder if it would be best to go through interpretive dance in those circumstances. But
No, we're not doing interpretive dance, Mark. Mark's been trying to get the
Gangnam style.
entire audience to do interpretive dance. And he was, Karen's going to volunteer? Okay. So you know what's coming, interpretive dance, no.
So I guess that what I was trying to say is that you did a really good job of showing the human side of being a professor. And I have always found that that is really important for students to see. Also, you don't know this, I think, because you were there, but all the things you've done might sound intimidating to a new person. Yeah. Think about it for a minute. Now you're going, well, of course not, but it could be. And then they see you, and then they talk with you, and I know what's going through their heads. I could do that too. And they could, because of you.
Well, everything I develop is open source. And so if anybody wants pretty much anything I've made, I just take it, use it, adapt it.
Well, that's the wonder of all of you being here today at CUE. You're learning from each other. You don't necessarily learn in the plenary sessions. You learn at the poster sessions. You learn at coffee. You learn just wandering the halls and bumping into folk. And that's the beauty of being in a physical meeting. You're actually interacting. And so you all are experience, truly great things, and hopefully your students will benefit. So now we're going to go to the new kid on the block that goes by the name of K-Pop. No, Dr. Pop.
Yeah, that's what my students call me.
Dr. Pop. So tell us how you became involved in this project.
One of the ASM emails, there was a big email about applying, and I'm pretty new to education research. I mean, I think majority of us are formally trained at the bench. So relatively new to this area and really trying to get involved as much as I can. And this aligned really well with the Capstone course that I teach. I teach senior microbiology students. Often a capstone is designated more so for students who can't necessarily get in the lab or haven't had that opportunity. So I designed it to be essentially a journal club, and we would engage with journal articles, and they'd pair up and present the journal to their peers. And that's after watching me do it a few times, and very friendly, safe environment to do so. But I still felt that regardless of how prepared they are as senior microbiology students, and their training in our program is wonderful, they still struggled with engaging with scientific literature. I do. It's not always my area of expertise. So when I saw this call, I thought it was interesting, and it's like, let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. So I was able to apply to it prior to ASM CUE last year. So I felt very special. I was like, I already know about this. I already applied. And I was lucky enough to be accepted and to have Nancy specifically as my mentor. And she's amazing. Very happy to know and work with her. But my senior students, they didn't know that this is what they were signing on for. They knew it was a capstone, and that the theme or the idea behind it was the microbiome. And that was it. That's really all they knew as they came in. And so I threw this idea at them. I was like, all right, we're doing it. And they were all completely for it, immediately excited. And really the thing that I think excited them the most was that they were getting authorship out of this as well, right? That is a huge idea, especially because they weren't in laboratories. That wasn't something that they could think about or had even thought they could do. So that was a huge motivator. And then I think the other thing that made it work out really well too is that this was so new to me, and that's what I had told them. I'm learning with you as we're doing this. And they put so much more pressure on themselves than I ever could. So although there's a schedule, it's so flexible that I could say, what's due? What should we have due next week? What do you want to have due?
Ooh.
Oh, they put so much more on them than I ever could. They were like, we're going to listen to all the podcasts. And
oh my.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, they were like, oh, I have them pair up based on their career aspirations, so they could pair up with someone who's thinking vet school as well. And the only catch was they needed to pick a TWiM episode that had something microbiome related. That was it. That was my only requirement to try and keep the theme alive. But they immediately and happily paired up based on their career aspirations. And each one of them in the pair was I'm going to listen to one specific podcast. And at the time, they needed to help with the Otter AI annotations as well, since we were newbies. We were the first semester. So they were like, we're going to have that completely done by next week. Like, oh, are you sure? Okay, that's kind of a lot. You're okay. But there was so much more autonomy associated with it. And it was really nice to be able to convey to them, you're my colleagues. This is new to me. I'm here to guide you. I'm here to help facilitate and talk about the things I know. But if I don't, which often I didn't, we looked it up together, or they would look it up and then come back and teach me. And it was very much hanging out with colleagues and learning together and engaging with literature that I may not have even had exposure to otherwise. And so it was one of those classes, and it was a class, so thankfully we had a time designated to meet. But it was one of those classes you look forward to every week. It was a Monday evening. It was like 4 to 6. So we were all just a little tired
It's
already.
Monday.
It's Monday. But they took it and ran with it and they did everything so quickly that by the end of the semester, we were done. And they were like, well, could we talk about our experience and maybe go to the Ramskeller and get some beers? Which we did. It was wonderful. It was a lab. It felt like being in a laboratory.
Mm-hmm. You were having lab meeting.
We were having lab meeting. And they were so focused and excited to do that. And there was so much ownership to the things that they did and how they engaged with the literature and ensured that the product, or at least I don't know, y'all are diving into the product now as you're working on the open education resource textbook, but ownership to ensure that the quality of what they turned out was good. And they learned so much, and and they picked something microbiome related, but the pre-vet students tried to pick something that was maybe more animal specific.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The pre-med picked something that was a little bit more health and medical. I had 2 students who were thinking maybe industry, but they weren't quite sure. So they had a bit more flexibility or in what they chose. But they learned new things that I don't think they were prepared to learn. It was wonderful.
Have redefined for everyone here what it means to teach a capstone course.
It was and still is, and if I can teach another one, I will. It was wonderful. I got to know the students so closely, and I knew some of them. They'd taken my Gen Micro course a few years prior, but I teach a large enrollment course, and no matter how much you try to promote that community, a couple years later, they're different. Their hair color is different, and you know. So, no, it was really wonderful, and I still know them to this day, and not that it was that long ago, but yeah.
Well, the only downside I see is all those letters of recommendation you have to write.
Precisely. Actually, that was another.
That's the only downside.
Another thing that helped. I was like, I'm getting to know all of you, and I could talk to them about my experience as well. And also, aside from getting authorship, which is just amazing, you get a letter of rec if you want it. It was like no pressure.
So speaking of your background, how did you get to where you are today?
Oh, gosh. Well, I feel like there's a consistency in a lot of people's stories of this is not at all what I had in my mind as a baby scientist. And it's only recently been that I've identified as a scientist. But I'm also a first-generation student and proud to be. So I love that we're all 3 first-gen
I think
here.
all 5 of us are. I certainly am.
I love it.
I know Mark
Oh,
is.
my gosh. Yeah. So, yeah.
So you can tell your students, we can do it. You can do it.
Absolutely.
And many of you in this room have done it as well.
Just to let you know, it's so interesting when you're at a new institution, you're a professor there, and someone brings up going to Europe to you, another colleague, and you say that you haven't been, and they go, oh, that's surprising. And you realize, there are differences in the sociology where I was raised, and how I grew up and what my parents valued. And it doesn't mean anything bad. It just means the diversity of things. And students need that representation too. They really do, to know it's okay. I make a joke of it, and I hope no one takes this in an incorrect way. You've heard of a big tent? We need a big Petri dish. Because there's room for all of us, and there should be.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think, I don't know how other first-gen students feel, but it wasn't something I was outwardly announcing, especially in undergrad. Everything was terrifying. As a college student, you're scared. And then the fact that you don't necessarily have someone guiding you, nothing against my parents, they're absolutely beautifully supportive, but vet school was my goal. That was my dream. And Colorado State University is one of the top vet schools. So I go in with that notion that I'm going to go to vet school. You do as you're told. You hard work. You put your forehead down and just get it done and don't complain. And I got a scholarship that allowed me to be in a research lab freshman year. And I had a postdoc who he took me under his wing, and I shadowed him like crazy to the point that he'd be walking to the bathroom and he'd just look at me and like, oh, you're going to the bathroom. I'll go back to the lab and wait for you, right? I'll just do what I'm told, like just tell me what to do. Terrified about everything. And the lab became a second home. When I wasn't in class, I was in the lab. That made sense to me. And I kept doing that. And then my grades were not at all competitive for vet school. And I had an advisor who made me cry because she looked at my grades and goes, yeah, you're not going to vet school. What else do you want to do?
Yes, we've all had those advisors.
My gosh.
Why do they do that?
Oh, I broke down right then and there. And I think she was very taken aback, but kept being in the lab. I got a second author paper out freshman year. And I didn't realize that was a big deal until people did that. When I would tell them, I'm like, oh, that's kind of a big deal. And this kind of makes sense to me, this being in the lab thing. And kept going. And I wasn't a microbiology student initially. And this is at Colorado State University, by the way. So they didn't get rid of me. But I was really impressed, especially by the people in our department. They cared, which I know sounds, they wanted to talk to me. Or at least it felt like they did. And I took an immunology class that wasn't your standard lecture at you. I had a professor she was drawing the processes with us. She didn't have lecture notes. We drew with her. And that blew my mind. It's like, oh, wait, we can learn like that? And that made so much sense to me that it didn't feel like studying. It didn't feel like a class. I don't know how to describe it.
She was still doing her chalk talk.
She was doing different colors, and there was something really magical about it. And one of my friends was like, she needs TAs for her non-micro class. I'm like, oh, I could never
Did you sign
do
up?
that.
I would have signed up.
I did, because my friend, I always hear that extroverts find the introverts, and that's how introverts find friends. He grabbed a hold of me and was like, you're going to come meet her and you're going to TA. And I was like, I'm not smart enough for this. I can't do this. And he, of course, would not hear of it. And I met her, and she was like, yeah, let's do it. And she took me under her wing, and I TA'd and got to teach, and she let me do lectures as an undergraduate student in the lab. And I fell in love with it, and I look up to her still, and I actually get to work with her now. She's in the audience somewhere. I'm not going to point her out because she'd hate me if I did that. And she inspired me to do that. And it didn't cross, especially when I decided I didn't want to go to vet school, I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. And by the time I was done with my undergrad, as much as I loved it, I was burnt out, like genuinely burnt out. So
Me too.
Yeah.
Total burnout.
When you said you felt that, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel that too. I needed a break. And we have a veterinary teaching hospital there, basically a CSU campus. And I applied to be laundry girl. And I did laundry for a little while.
There's nothing wrong with it.
No, it was so nice. I didn't have to bring work home. Once I showered, I didn't have to bring work home. And I applied for grad school at CSU because I love CSU. My family's there. I was like, let's just see if I get in. Let's just see what happens. And I wasn't sure. And I did recruitment weekend. And it was as I was waiting that it hit me. I was nervous. Am I going to get in? And it was at that moment that I was like, this is what I want to do. And I get paid, and albeit it's not a lot, but I get paid to learn. And that to me is just such a dream, just the concept of that. And so I did. I grad school, I tell my students, will change you sometimes.
For the best,
For
or
the best,
worst.
or the worst. I say that too. But figuring out what you like is important, but also figuring out what you don't like is just as important. And there are a lot of moments where I realized, that's not for me. But I was so excited at the idea of being able to, I was part of our program, we have to GTA for the first year. That was the thing that that excited me. And the professor, the doctor who inspired me to teach, agreed to come on my committee so that I was in a laboratory looking at neurodegenerative research, but I wanted to really think about the immunological response and how the brain responds to microbial exposures. And so I wrote a grant where the majority of people on my committee were not experts in that area, and she was and is. And so I asked her to be on my committee, and she guided me even as a graduate student. And by the end of grad school, I was a little bit burnt out.
We all were.
Oh my gosh. So, I was interviewing for postdocs. I had multiple offers, and for whatever reason, that did not inspire me. I wasn't excited at the idea of doing a postdoc. And an instructor position opened up in my department to teach general microbiology, and it was a year position. And I applied, and I somehow got it, and it felt right. It was like, this is my postdoc. My postdoc is to learn how to teach better and be engaged in education research. And then this position opened up, and this position was to teach the courses that I was teaching as an instructor. So it was a risk. I might not get it. I'm competing with everybody. And I was lucky enough to apply and to get it, and was told that I had gotten it right as COVID hit. So there was no celebration.
So you got to learn how to teach remotely.
Remotely. Took all the workshops and teach remotely. But it's been really magical, and I still do bench science because that makes me stronger. And I am pushing to do ed research because that makes me stronger. But the theme amongst everything that I do is undergraduate involvement. So I only have undergrads in my lab, and man, they are the most amazing scientists. The questions that they ask, I could never in a million years think of. And so they inspire me every day. There's always those one or two where you're like, but the majority are pretty amazing. So yeah.
Well, Dr. Pop, that was an amazing, amazing story. First off, hats off to you, literally.
Oh,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Applause.
Thank you.
You said several things that really resonated with me that I'd like the audience to remember. I think they should remember. They probably already will. But the issue of mentorship is really important. Mm-hmm. And not only were you mentored, you're now mentoring. Yes. So you're paying it forward, as the saying goes. And all of us have the story of someone who grabs us by the collar and says, yeah, you can do it.
Yes.
And sometimes they're people much older than you are. Sometimes they're people younger than you are. That mentorship aspect is important. In addition, I would argue your Capstone course is really, you're not teaching it, you're facilitating it.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's remarkable because there is the largest problem I see with students is, and this is post-COVID, is passivity, where they're just going to sit back and they don't know what to try next. Mm-hmm. And the only way to beat that is to model what you need to see.
Yes.
And that's what you're doing. And you see how it's paid off for them. You lit the fire. Also, them making choices is always better than you imposing those choices.
Absolutely.
Now, some people may be listening to your story, Dr. Pop, and saying, my students would never do this. And that might be true. Mm-hmm. But I'll bet if they try, some would. Mm-hmm. And then bit by bit, that creates, if you'll forgive my saying, a new culture.
Oh,
precisely.
I'm going to hit you with this.
Oh, I like that.
Bum.
Yeah, that's I do that. Anyway, the point,
Karen's walking away.
Yeah, I know. Grimacing.
And she's a stand-up. She does stand-up.
Yeah.
She's just adding that to her notes.
So it's important to note that what you've heard today, actually from everyone, is very important because what you're hearing is there are lots of paths. I am surprised by the number of students who don't know how one gets into graduate school or what the process is, and so you have an opportunity to tell them. And even if you're teaching large numbers of students, there are ways. I mean, I went to UCLA, and I literally went to graduate school with someone who had graduated the same year from UCLA that I did. We took all the same courses. I had never met him. Mm-hmm. All right? And that's really common at big institutions. But even at that big institution, and it was kind of on me, I had to find my mentors. I had to find my group, as it were. And I helped other people do the same thing, and I've had a career doing it, and it really pays off. And look at what you bring, the story that you bring to your students.
My big goal, especially, I remember as an undergrad feeling like one of many in those big lecture courses. And I'm privileged now to be able to teach one of those courses. And so for me, one of my main goals is to promote engagement and hope that the students don't feel like one of many. So we have an undergraduate learning assistant program that, not toot my own horn, or maybe I need to. Eileen, I don't know if she's here. She told me I need to do that. But really trying to promote that community and hope that the students don't feel like one of many.
You know, I had a colleague where I used to teach who was in physics, and people wouldn't answer questions in class. And so he would say, well, just guess. And then they would, and he would make a buzzer sound. And he was surprised that they didn't want to contribute after that. When I was an undergrad, it was the same thing. Organic chemistry professor, Donald J. Cram, that's really his name, would throw a piece of chalk into the audience. Whoever catches this has to answer a question. We would dive away like it was a hand grenade. And so the truth is, there really aren't stupid questions. There are questions that are not thought out, which is not the same thing. And even with those kinds of questions, I have seen it where the student asks the question and then answers it themselves. You have the kind of environment, the kind of situation where they can contribute and work with you. It is collaborative by nature. And as you can see, all three of our guests today do exactly that.
So we were going to do a Q&A, but
Yes.
we probably don't have time. But can we please ask someone to tell us the product that we have been presented with at Microbe TV? Yes? What we got yesterday from you?
Oh, so, okay.
This is the
There's so
exciting
many
part.
things we're working on.
This is me being manipulative that we will have to have those things up now by the time this episode airs. Do you like that?
Yeah. So something that Katriana mentioned especially was working on the otter transcript. So currently, the TWiM catalog only includes about 20 transcripts of the episodes. And so part of our grant was to make transcripts for all of them. We don't have all of them, but we'll have about 100 by the end of this semester. And so those are not only paper transcripts. So they will link to the Otter, which is an AI transcript service, but part of what the students, Katriana's students in that section, and we all, the PIs, we all have students who are working on these transcripts. So they have two passes besides AI, because we've heard how inaccurate AI can be. So they have two people's eyes correcting all of the science words in particular. And if you go to the Otter link, you can actually see for accessibility. Now, my students find this helpful because I have a lot of second language, English as a second language students, or you might have students who have hearing accessibility issues. The Otter transcripts, they highlight the word as it's being spoken. So that's something that's really nice. And so there'll be about 70 of those that are in addition to the 20 that are on there now for accessibility.
And there will be a link to the transcripts in the show notes. And also, please, a really big round of applause for the students who helped make this possible.
Yay!
So I was going to ask one more question. I was going to take the chair's prerogative and ask our three guests here today, what can TWiM do better for you to help make your lives easier? We always welcome if any of you have any suggestions for us on paper topics. We actually cover some of the papers that you throw over the transom, so to speak, and because picking papers is hard. There's a large volume of literature, and picking papers is one of our great challenges, and I really throw it over to you all to help us. So,
I'm not sure. I mean,
We know.
so I'm part of the editing team in Otter as well, and I've been listening to especially the last ones because I do them now as they come up. So I just really like the variety of things that you all pick from, and so just keeping it wide open and having
Wide
a lot
open.
of variety. That way, everybody has something to hook on to, and so that breadth helps us get everyone involved.
Thank you.
I want to caveat this by saying I love TWiM.
Thank you. We love doing it for you on behalf of my other podcast hosts.
When you do get into the technical stuff, the jargon, the data, the figures, if you could maybe slow down a little bit with the speaking. The transcripts help. I had students that were like, that transcript was a lifesaver. Because some of the topics do go by a little quickly.
Yeah.
And they get missed. And if you're just listening, sometimes the students had to go back and re-listen. So having the transcript has helped like a lot.
Also, when you say people's names sort of out of the blue and having to go find that person when I couldn't exactly hear what the name was clearly, we've had to do 20, 30-minute searches to find people. So a little bit more context when you mention people out of the blue.
Thank you.
But we love TWiM.
We love notes. We love notes.
We love it. Yes.
I'm just going to echo what Becky said. I agree that having a wide breadth of topics. One, because we all have quite a few students who want to do different areas of research, but then I have students who are taking micro because they have to as part of their degree. And often they're like, why do I need to do this? Which that's a challenge, and they're waving a red flag, and I'm like, you're going to love it by the end.
They get to do it.
They get to do it, right? But having that wide breadth of topics hopefully can get to multiple students and help them see, yes, that's why this matters.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our guest here today, Dr. Becky Spiel-Thielman from Middle Tennessee State University. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Melanie Villard from Ancora Ramsey Community College in Minnesota.
Anoka Ramsey.
Okay.
Thank you.
I get it wrong every time. And Dr. Kat Popchak
That's perfect. Yep.
from Colorado State University. And last but not least, Dr. Martin from our sister podcast,
Thank you.
Matters Microbial, our ever-adjacent TWiM pseudo co-host. Thank you, Mark. It's always a pleasure. For those of you, Microbe TV is a 501c3 registered charity with the U.S. IRS that offers free science shows created by scientists. So if you like our content, please consider donating at microbe.tv/contributes. Show notes will be available on microbe.tv/TWiM. Until next time, I'm Michael Schmidt from the Medical University of South Carolina. And thank you all for attending this very special session of TWiM at ASMQ. Thank you.